All right, welcome to the podcast. So today we have a lot of people here, a lot more people than typical. So I'm going to just go around briefly and have people introduce themselves, just kind of tell us what their political affiliation is and anything else they want to tell us about themselves. And then we'll start the podcast. So I'll start out. My name is Nick. I'm a conservative Democrat, I think, although I'm not sure, kind of. Um, I live in New York State, in Western New York, although I'm originally from Rhode Island. Um, and that's it. Chuck, do you want to go?
Sure. My name is Chuck Vipperman, Gen Xer from Danville, Virginia, as far south as you can get and still be in Virginia, not North Carolina. I'm 56 years old, got two kids, a wife, now getting ready to celebrate our 25th anniversary in 1 month. And constitutional minarchist is the best I can do in terms of my political affiliation, such as it is. I can't decide if I'm more conservative or more libertarian. I do not like abortion, but I like less people who try to make abortion illegal. That kind of thing. Very much on individual rights. If you don't have individual freedom, then all of the security in the world is useless. That kind of thing. Um, Mind your own business. Don't bother me, and we'll get along famously.
Chris? Uh-oh, I can't hear you. And you're not
Can you hear
on.
me now?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm Chris. I'm kind of a moderate left lean type person. I have a whole lot of views all across the spectrum. You can pick and choose depending on the issues. So I'm not just trying to stay in the middle of the pack, but I'm just more so finding where the truth ends up lying at. So that's kind of the type of person that I am. And I'm from Kentucky, and I don't know. I'm a mathematician by trade. Have a lot of cool ideas. So that's me.
Nice. Daryl?
I'm Daryl. I'm from Southern Ontario in Canada. Um, and so I tend to vote Liberal up here, which is kind of the left of center centrist party. Sometimes they're right of center, sometimes they're left of center. But I've voted conservative in the middle, and in some cases we have a social democrat party here, which I've also voted for, depending on the election and the issues and what's going on.
Do you have a Republican Party in Canada?
We have a conservative party here,
Yeah.
which I think Jon Stewart once back a while ago said, "Oh, look, the Canadians had an election and the Conservatives won." Mind you, the Conservative Party is like the Gay Native for Peace party. I mean, I think abortion is, they don't even bring it up. So
Okay.
they are conservative in many ways, and they tend right now to be moving farther to the right. But I think they've given up on being against gay marriage. Finally, I
Okay.
mean,
So it's not ultra conservative.
it's not ultra
Moderate
conservative.
conservative.
It's fairly moderate conservative. There
Okay.
there are some members of them that are farther right, but it's generally, abortion doesn't really play a. I mean, abortion is completely legal in Canada, right up till birth. Practically, it's never. No one will give an abortion that late unless there's something seriously medically wrong. But I mean, there's just no law. There's no law, so it's and basically the conservatives don't like to talk about it because it generally loses them election in a three-party system. It's just they have other things they'd rather focus on.
Okay. All right. Sam?
Hi, everybody. My name is Alana, and many people know me as Sammy. And I am from a family of Hungarian refugees. So I actually have dual citizenship with Hungary and the United States, or as I should say, the European Union. I grew up in the US Virgin Islands, which is a US territory. I didn't grow up in the United States, which I sometimes think places me on the outside of a lot of topics because I tend to act like it doesn't affect me, and it does. But I am a centrist, and yeah, I'm a mother of 5. I was talking with Chuck earlier. I have a son with special needs as well. And I don't know, being a parent is pretty much the majority of my life. I am also a small business owner / manager. Me and my brother have taken over my dad's software company, and I run that with him. We are a competitor to Adobe. So if anybody needs to convert a document to PDF, let me know. But other than that, I love politics and I love discussing things, and I don't hold a grudge. So
Gerard?
Yeah, I'm Jared. I am
Keep
the
saying
sexiest person on the panel as usual. I tend to fall to the left. I take things on a case by case basis, policy by policy basis. I can't paint myself into the corner, but I do find that on a lot of subjects, I just fall to the left. I would say center left, sometimes a little more than center left. Stop short of the crazies. Yeah, also career military guy, which paints some of my perspectives. And now outside of my day job, I'm also involved in a lot of like theater. So that has definitely opened my eyes to a lot of these. What is the right term? I'm more socially aware than I probably would have been if I wasn't involved in that world. It's a more diverse world than my day job of IT. So that's me.
How long were you in the military for?
20 years.
20 years?
Yep. I'd like to thank all of you taxpayers, I guess, except Daryl for my monthly check that I get now.
I did not realize you were in the military that long. You were in the Army, right? Army?
Marines.
Oh, you were a Marine?
Yep. 20 years in the Marines, did a couple trips to Iraq, a couple trips to Afghanistan.
Oh, holy
There's-
shit.
There's no
Now I
such thing
live
as
in Rhode Island.
there's no such thing as an ex-Marine from what I've heard too. So
That's right. I am still a giant
Still a
prick.
Marine.
And yeah, and I live in Rhode Island now. I'm actually moving out to Portland, Oregon in about 6 weeks.
Have I been saying your name wrong?
You know, when you're Nick, there's no wrong way to say a name.
Okay. Jared, whatever. All right. So thank you guys for doing that. I appreciate it. It's hard to introduce people when there's so many. But all right. So today we're going to talk about the protests. I'm assuming everybody is well aware of what's going on around the country. And so I think this is a good topic to talk about, but it's also kind of a complex topic, and we can easily get sidetracked. So it has its good points and its bad points. But I think I want to start just kind of by defining what protest is, and I kind of want to hear from you guys what you think is reasonable sort of protest, how you would define peaceful protest. I know that there is some precedent for this, obviously, in the Supreme Court, what it means to peaceably protest. But in this particular situation, especially with the universities, it does get a little bit complex because you have a public university. In most of the cases, some I guess are private, but the question is much more less ambiguous there. But in the public universities, you know, what do you feel like is considered reasonable, peaceful, constitutionally protected protest as opposed to you know, illegal protest or just blatant violation of the law? So whoever wants to pick up on that, sort of throw out your 2 cents.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start if no one else wants to. Just in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed. The libertarian side of me, of course, cherishes free speech, obviously, and it's an essential component to being a liberal democracy, as we all have to agree the U.S. is supposed to be. You're right, Nick, insofar as the legal questions become a little thornier when you're looking at what's called a public university, but they still own the property, and they have a charge as property owners to make sure that there's access and egress available to all of their customers. And really the minute when a protest inhibits that in any meaningful way, then I believe it starts running afoul of the law. In addition to the law of whatever state you happen to be living in, there's also, again, university individual codes of conduct that they are enforcing. Again, that's the legal part of it. Essentially, though, we in America and pretty much, with very few exceptions, agree that, again, your right to protest extends up into the right to intimidate or bully or impede the free movement of anyone else. Once it does that, then it becomes something else. Also, there's the very real specter of trespassing. If a property owner or the manager of that property tells you to vacate the premises and you do not, then in any legal definition is trespassing. And somebody countered, one of the protesters said, well, such and such pays money tuition to go to Columbia University or whatever. So yeah, but that doesn't give you permission to camp out on the main quad. If I rented a room from Howard Johnson's and I fucking tent in the lobby, I would expect they would want to remove me because I didn't rent the lobby, and I'm preventing other people from coming in. I rented a room at the Howard Johnson. So yeah, that was kind of a specious argument. And again, the libertarian in me wants to make damn sure that people who want to protest have a chance to. I mean, you have to separate yourself from what the protest is about. That's the hardest thing for us. Those who are predisposed to agree with the protesters in this case are going to interpret free speech in a sometimes different way than those who disagree. We have to mentally separate ourselves from what the protest is all about, because whether you agree with it, disagree with it, or don't give a shit about it, its legality it does not hinge upon whether you agree with it. Simple as that. And I most certainly don't agree with these protests, but you have to separate yourself. Again, we're talking just about the legality of them right now. You have to separate yourself from what they're saying and act like it's a group of protesters you do like, and then see what you think about it. That's the litmus test I've been using.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of the legality, it can be a little thorny question, but I think most reasonable people know that a legitimate protest does not include harassment, intimidation, restricting one's access. We've seen Jewish people denied entry into school buildings, campus buildings and whatnot. Yeah, I think most reasonable people agree once those lines are crossed, then it's no longer a protest. It's something that needs to be addressed in another way.
Does anybody disagree with that?
That
A
sounds
little
about
bit.
right. Okay.
Sorry.
Sam?
I agree. Go. Let Sammy go.
Sorry, I'm rolling a joint. I disagree because there are instances where you can look back at Ruby Ridges, for example, or and I really hate to compare these to civil rights protests because I feel like that's like a very scapegoat, and it's something used honestly mostly by white people in debate. To be like, well, the civil rights protests, and yes, they were literally protesting the right to exist as a human being in this country and to go to schools. But my point is that we can't sit here and deny that protests, or what we've considered protests in this country, have never been violent, blocking people from entering buildings, blocking businesses from selling to certain people. To this day, we use the dollar to protest a lot, which I think is frankly the most effective way to protest. But the point is you're still telling people to boycott a business, to do harm to a business. Whether that is blocking the entrance or not allowing people to buy from there, which is essentially what a lot of these students are protesting ultimately. But I'm just saying that I don't agree with what Chuck said in terms of historically what this country has allowed to be as a protest and what is now also accepted as valid history, which is that's how things were changed. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that's how the youth is going to look at it.
I think the difference here is that a lot of the people who were doing those things knew that they were trespassing. They knew that they were breaking the law, and were quite willing to be arrested. And I think a lot of it was non-violent protest. I mean, there was more trespass, blocking people, civil disobedience, just as opposed to rising to the level of violence. You lose your moral high ground. But yes, yeah. But when you're masked and you don't want to be identified or arrested or complaining that you are arrested, when that's kind of the whole point of these things, is you're being arrested to draw attention to whatever particular cause, right or wrong, you agree with. But yeah, I mean, I think, and so I think what Chuck is saying is this is what the law is, or this is what's legal and not. And what you're saying, I think, is sometimes you need to break the law a bit to make a point, and I think there's some definitely valid cases for that.
Yeah,
and that's what I was saying. And
Yeah.
Ultimately, I take issue with every single protest being compared to the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah, yes.
Because it's almost soiling what that was genuinely about, which was some people in this country were literally being denied the right of voting and being considered a full human, etc. To me, these protests are not that serious and should not ever be taken at that same level. But that's just what I was giving you as an example of what these young people in university are thinking when they are doing things that are outside of the law in protest.
And I think a bunch of them, I mean, a bunch of them just haven't read any history, but I think a bunch of them are just war is bad. We've been protesting war for the last 50 years, 60 years, and we're going to protest war. And if they're not hurting anyone else, and they're not being violent, and they're not blocking access, and you want to go, hey, war is bad, then stick up your little peace sign and some rainbows and go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So I think we lose a little bit of the nuance using the word protest. Protest is a big word. Protest, we can wear a hat that says, I am against cancer, and you're protesting cancer, or whatever. I think we need to define the protest that we're referring to, which is what I would consider kind of running parallel to a rally being for something, protest being against something. And I do think that nuance is important. That's two different parts, two different areas of verbiage of the First Amendment that these different types of things are referring to. When we're talking about protest in this context, it's the assembly style of protest, against something instead of for something. And I think we need to be careful of recency bias a little bit. When we talk about protests not being disruptive to what other people are doing, when we look in the context of right now, I think a reasonable person looks at it and says, sure, that's not right. People stopping traffic. Yeah, I don't think that that's right. When you look at something and it's outside the US, like Arab Spring, when you're protesting a corrupt government, when you're protesting an authority that is negatively I'm sorry, I'm bad at words. When you're protesting against a authority or a body that is physically harming people, that is actually truly hurting people, I think I don't think it's as firm of a line. I think the line is a little bit blurrier as to how much disruption really is okay. When you have a
I would
guy
say
stand-
civil war is okay for totalitarianism.
and so is
that's just
a guy
me.
standing in front of a tank in Tiananmen Square. I mean, right now, for these protests, if somebody was lining up in front of fire engines or ambulances, I think we'd say it was wrong. Tiananmen Square in China, we all celebrate somebody standing in front of a tank that was trying to go down the street. So I don't think it's a hard line. I think it depends on what is being protested against.
Yeah.
And I think that line is a lot further than people think when people are protesting, that's the most important thing in the world to them.
And
Of course. But
and-
the line isn't always in the same place.
And I think a lot of the people who are protesting, they think that's the case right now. Right now, they think that there's lots of people dying in Gaza, and they have a right to cross that line because there's something really important.
Well, the question was about just the
The
legality.
law, yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I restricted mine to. And like I said, when you're determining whether it's legal, illegal in that respect, what they're protesting has to be irrelevant. They have, whether you agree with it, don't, or whatever, just straight legality. Are you breaking the law now? And do we need to protect these other people that you are? Yeah, that's all I was addressing there. In terms of, we can get in, and I feel sure later we'll get into the nature of this protest. But in terms of the legality, I mean, there's, a little different from state to state, maybe, but yeah.
And to that point, if you look at people's views, if you can sit back and look at and say, was Jan 6 out of the line, and or the vaccine demonstrations, or BLM, or these current ones on against the war, if your view isn't the same across all four of those spectrums,
Right,
then you haven't stepped back and really thought about what do you really believe in free speech, because a lot of the people who were against BLM and are against Gaza were quite happy with the J6 and the vaccine, protests.
you got to apply,
and vice versa, right?
Yeah, when we're determining whether a protest is legally kosher or not, the content has got to be no consideration at all.
And there
if you're gonna do it right.
millions of marches for the BLM protests that were quite legitimately legal. They had them in Canada, no violence. People got out and did things. There was other ones that crossed the line. There and here we have there's protests in the States. I'm sure at some campuses haven't crossed the line, and others have.
I think it's really tough to tell who crossed the line and who didn't cross the line, depending on, the coverage of this has been very sort of, depending on where you're looking, it's really hard to know exactly what's going on. Chris, did you have anything to add to the protest question?
Yeah, I think that the nature of protests is to be disruptive and intrusive, to be able to get into, disrupt people's everyday life, to be able to get into, get their attentions to your issues. And a lot of protests tend to be associated with minority groups because a lot of times, when the majority wins and gets to pick who's in charge and has the power, it ends up being a lot of times the minorities don't have that influence to a certain degree. So it's usually their issues that need to get that disruptive attention. They don't necessarily control the media channels and all this other stuff. So they have to find unique ways of being able to get that attention, whatever that ends up being. It's not always the majority groups, but it's whatever group feels like they don't have the power to at that particular point in time. Pretty much, they can, if it's significant enough for them, they will be disruptive and find ways to be disruptive. Now, in terms of whether or not that ends up being, crossing the lines of legality, we all have rules and laws. I think I agree with what Chuck said earlier in regards to, you have to make sure you protect the public space so that everybody can use it, yada yada, all that good stuff. And so at the end of the day, it comes up to the protester to decide what kind of lines, how far into, possibly breaking the law are they willing to go in order to sell their message. But we all know that there is a line that can be crossed to where you go way too far, and all of a sudden you undermine your own process, your own cause, right? Because at the end of the day, you're trying to influence minds. You're trying to influence other people that may not have seen you on their TV screens because, you know, the news channels didn't find it as important enough for whatever reason that might be. And so it's like, oh, these folks don't connect with you for some reason. You're trying to get into their space for a second. So you have to be disruptive to get there, but you don't want to be so, you know, obscene that they can't connect with you, that they can't have empathy at the same time. And that's something that Martin Luther King kind of dealt with when he wanted his nonviolent resistance, right? So he wanted to be resist and show up in public spaces and stuff and march in different ways. But he didn't want to necessarily be, you know, go so far out that it turns into violence, because he knew that that's going to break down the ability for people to be able to empathize with the Black cause. And if you lose the empathy of the people you're trying to get the attention of, you've basically defeated the purpose of your protest in the first place.
He struck that
9 times out of
balance
10.
well.
You say what?
He struck the balance between
Mhm.
you know, nonviolence and getting that
Right.
appropriate level of attention. Okay, so I think the next question is, the big question here is, you know, what do you guys think about the motivations for the protests? Do you feel like they meet that criteria? I mean, it sounds like obviously a lot of you don't, or you feel like they've gone too far. Obviously, one of the distinctions between civil rights protests and the protests today is you didn't, at least I've never seen any video footage of people yelling for, you know, 10,000 more 10-7s to happen. I mean, when you see that sort of stuff, essentially what that person's saying, whether they mean it or not, or understand it, or know what the fuck they're talking about, is they want 1,000 Jewish people to be murdered, mass murdered, burned, and raped again and again and again and again, right? And regardless of whether or not you sympathize with the Palestinian cause, which I think is a perfectly reasonable position to take, considering, right? But that sort of, when people see that, the public sentiment, which I think somebody like Martin Luther King was able to really understand, and he articulated that, you're going to lose it, right? And if you have enough people doing it, it makes it really hard for people who sympathize with your cause to continue to argue on your side, right? And I think that's really kind of what's happened, is there's been enough people here who's kind of crossed those lines. The other difference here is obviously this is the protest itself, or the protests as I understand them, are to get the colleges to stop funding Israel in some way. I don't know what the financial relationship is exactly, but there's some sort of financial relationship. So it's kind of like, what? Like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like that important of a cause, or that it would really have any sort of influence. And so, at least to you know, somebody sitting at home, it's not like if Columbia University stops funding Israel, Israel's going to pull back, right? Like, it's not going to affect them at all. So it's a symbolic thing. And so because of that, and because it really doesn't have any sort of impact on Americans themselves, and then you start throwing in there the stuff that the right wing sort of harps on, which is this, you know, some of the violent acts, and there are some, the threats, the chants, right? The only solution is intifada revolution. Well, that sounds like violence, even if you don't mean it or you don't understand it. And in the past, historically, intifada has been analogous to violence, especially the second intifada, whether you're Muslim or you're Jewish, right? So I'm kind of going on a rant here, but just based on you know, that kind of stuff, it just doesn't reach that same level. They don't have it. I don't find their purpose to be important enough for them to be doing what they're doing. However, if it was civil rights, if it was something else, my position on that would be different, because I think, you know, if you read the university's policies on protests, it's like you have to get approval then we'll give you approval. Then you can protest underneath the fucking umbrella outside. Like, we've all seen those protests. Nobody gives a shit. You walk by them, nobody cares, right? So you're not going to make any sort of difference. But when you really start to inconvenience people, right? That's when people start paying attention. The problem here is, and I think it was the opposite, because the civil rights movement sort of started out being really unpopular and then started being popular after the fact, right? In this scenario, it's like it's just unpopular and it's getting more unpopular as far as I can tell. So, yeah, go ahead.
So there's kind of a few things here. Is that I was thinking, like, how big are these protests really? I mean, Columbia University has what, nearly 37,000 students. So like a couple hundred people showing up.
That seems like a lot.
I just Googled. I
guess a lot of
check.
online component.
There may be online. There may
commuter.
be. I don't know if they do. I don't know how they do. I know University of Waterloo has co-op terms.
That seems
So
like
half the people are off on work terms, while the other half are. But still, there's a lot of. I mean, there's probably 20,000 or more here, and and I think Columbia is much bigger than Waterloo. But I mean, is the news making this out much more than it is as far as there's just a few people, a very small section.
I'm sure of it. I'm sure.
Now the other thing is that what I find in a lot of these protests is most people don't have a clue what they're protesting or what actions they're asking for. In the globalization that we're in, asking any of the universities to divest in Israel, it's not, or Lockheed Martin, or it's not like most of these places are buying up Lockheed Martin stock. They're just investing in markets. Actually being able to even giving them what they wanted if they decided that was the easiest thing to do. I don't think they can do that. We had the same thing up here with there was a convoy protest for vaccines in Ottawa, and they were protesting the federal government for things that were in municipal and provincial government's control, and demanding that the prime minister step down if you don't do these things that are completely out of your control. I mean, divesting from Israel. We don't. Here, you're a university. We don't want you to do business with Google. Are you serious? I mean, even if they invested directly in Google, I mean, you can't have a university program that doesn't deal with some of these big tech companies. It's just a non-starter. I mean, they haven't even begun to think out what the problem is. And I think most of the protests are like the J6. A lot of people don't really know what the issues are. They don't know what actions they're going to go for, or even if they got them, how they could be done.
Darryl, so you don't think that the people who are protesting understand really what they're protesting, or have a comprehensive understanding of it?
Well, I mean, so for what they're demanding, divest from Israel. I mean, they have no. I doubt very much that like 0.1% of the university knows how the university invests their money, or the global markets, or how unless you're in the economics department protesting, you probably don't have a clue about how these things are, or how it's like someone got together and said, hey, what can we demand? Well, 20 years ago, before there was as much globalization, the university did this, so let's do that, right? Where it's just like, you really can't just, even if they gave into the demand, I don't think you could even do it. And as you said,
it's a weird thing to protest.
As you said, if all the universities dumped everything Israel, it would make the U.S. is currently boycotting Russia on a massive, probably $1 trillion scale, and big deal. Just keep trucking along. It's not going to make a difference. If every university pulled out of Israel completely, if that was even possible, it wouldn't show up as a blip. Not when the Congress, here's 18 billion. or whatever many,
Does-
I can't remember any building it was. It's
Does,
just,
does anybody sympathize with the protesters? Agree with what they're saying, or at least on some level? Anybody here?
I was gonna say, I only sympathize on a level of that I have teenagers. And I have two, I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old. And I noticed that this is just maybe how the youth feel the best way to get their point across. And I do appreciate, just even though I don't agree with the protests, I do appreciate that the youth take such a active role, because I'm a child of the Iraq War. Like I was a young kid. I wasn't even in high school when that started. And I didn't go out and protest. You know what I mean? Like when that was still going on, none of us did in my generation. I'm not saying it would have made a huge difference. Back then, the culture was also very much like, if you were protesting that thing, you were like pro-terrorist, I guess. But I'm just giving an example of like trying to get to what their issue was, which is I think they just don't want war and violence. I just, as Daryl said, like they don't have an understanding of what they're actually, one, protesting really, and two, what their university can really do. I think that to them, it's just, that's what they have their control over. That's what their money is in. So that's what they're gonna go with.
Okay. Well,
I'll be probably, surprise, surprise, a little less sympathetic than others. I think the vast majority of those who are protesting here don't have a motherfucking clue about what they're doing. They are doing something right now that feels good. If you're a 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old, and you discover that if you put on these clothes and say these magic words, then the adults in your life all of a sudden don't ignore you. They pay attention to you. They heed you. They listen to you. You're going to put on those clothes. You're going to say those magic phrases that make you consequential for the first time in your life. That is a very seductive lure to be able to get these grown-ups who have the power and the money to heed you, to listen to you and your friends.
you think it's about attention?
Quite a bit of it is. Now, if they truly wanted to get their message, have their message amplified, then they would be welcoming any means to do that. What happens, though, when reporters try to interview protesters, these jackasses in Home Depot bright yellow vests come up, the protest sentinels or whatever, and they don't let them. They don't want the protesters, the rank and file, to speak with reporters. Ordinarily, if you're trying to amplify a message, this is free publicity, publicity you cannot buy, invaluable. Why would you not want to amplify your message? Well, we know why, because, you know, the average protester knows about as much going on as a man in the moon. Again, as we talked about before, this fits into the modern progressive binary worldview where everyone is either oppressor or oppressed. Very simplistic, very reductive, obviously, but this falls very neatly into that. And if you try to peel the onion back a little bit, if you try to get down to the surface, then the only response you get is a clap and response from the river to the sea, but in chants, and it's almost like a pagan religious ritual. No sense there. And again, it just takes the most cursory of information to determine that when they shout these words like genocide and apartheid, which are two of the famous, I mean, both of them are provably untrue. They simply do not apply here. But they have been drilled into these people, and if you ask them a question, it's almost guaranteed that any answer is going to include these magic little words that make the adults notice you. It is seductive. If I were that age and I learned that I can say certain phrases to make the adults around me pay attention to me, heed me, fear me, I can't say I would not have taken advantage of that. I don't think I would have, but I can't say that I would not have because that's seductive. And but again, in terms of, yes, they are, whether they realize it or not, they are lending aid and succor to a terrorist group that has vowed to do 10/7 over and over and over and over again as long as they exist. They cannot exist,
Rob,
not in any meaningful form after this.
I'm interested in hearing your perspective on this, having been in the Middle East for several years and been, I would assume, in some sort of military zone. And I feel like your perspective.
I'm going to be slightly contrarian to some of the things that we've heard so far. Like, when you ask, do you support what the protesters are doing? You're not asking about the viewpoint, I assume, because I think the viewpoint, I don't think many people, I think Palestine and Israel have a very long and complicated history. And I think if you're going to just choose one side or the other, you're going to be wrong. There's just too much background there. Do I support the people like chaining themselves into buildings and making demands to be let out? No, I don't. But I do support college kids going out there and being civic minded and trying to pay attention to things that are going on in the world. We sit there and we complain about people watching TikTok all day and hanging out on social media all day. Well, now we've got college kids who aren't doing that. They are paying attention to the world. They're paying attention to what's going on in the world, and they're voicing an opinion on it, right or wrong. Whether or not you agree with that opinion, they are. And sure, do I think that they hold this incredibly nuanced understanding of everything that's going on there? No. I also think that's true of 99.5% of the American population right now. I think they, like a lot of people, think that they understand exactly what's going on and have their finger on the pulse of it. Sure, that no different than anybody else. They're just, when you get outside of people chaining themselves into buildings, it's really no different than half the crap you see running through Facebook.
So let me ask you this then: do you, do you think that any sort of protest is good then? Anything based, if they were young people protesting for, racism, like actual racism, would that, I'm serious, because if your justification for protest is just that they're civic minded, then, right?
So I want to make a distinction between a protest and a rally. A protest is against something, a rally is for something.
But you can be against.
Charlottesville was a rally,
right?
Charlottesville was a rally, not a protest. And while they have the right to do that, and hey, you're out there saying it was a rally for things that were obviously indefensible.
But you could have a protest for something that's bad. That's my only point, right? And if you're protesting something bad, just because you're civic minded doesn't necessarily make it good, right?
So protests aren't good or bad. Protests are just protests. That's like saying speech is good or bad. It's just
okay.
It's just what
I'm just clarifying. Yeah. I think this is kind of an extension of TikTok and all that stuff. This is their own, they're TikToking their way through the protest or whatever that is.
I think that's just what they're doing now. Protests at college campuses aren't anything unusual. They tend to be more affected by people who swing to the far left. It's just, I just think that's, people come from different parts of the country. They get together somewhere, and whether or not anybody wants to admit it, when you're in that age frame between 18 and 22 years old, even going to your mid-20s, you're looking for leadership, good leadership or bad leadership. You're going to respond to leadership, and that's just who's making the loudest noise at a college.
But would you admit that it could take them down a really dark road in some instances, right? Obviously.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Look, absolutely.
Abortion protests exist where people just stand outside of clinics where women are going to get birth control and they're just torturing people.
Right.
There is actually a good or bad protest, I think, personally.
Yeah.
I think it's the actions that make it. Like I would consider myself pro-abortion. People's hanging outside of a clinic, holding up a sign saying I'm against abortion. I don't think that's inherently bad. I think it
But
becomes
there,
bad
but that,
when they
look,
start.
not to drag this into another whole thing, but my point that I was saying is that they're not holding up signs that are just like abortion is bad. They're calling people murderers and you know, shaming you as you walk in there. So that's part of the
And that's the
whole.
difference. It's not the
But the
protest, it's
words
how
are the
people at the
word. It's
protest
not
are
just the
acting, it's the
signs.
actions
It's
that
the
they're taking.
words. It's not just. I'm just saying though. It's not just the signs though. It's the words that these human beings are yelling at other human beings, and it can become a bad protest. To
I
me,
agree
you know
with
what I
you.
mean? Like
I agree with you.
harmful.
I don't think protests are good or bad, but the actions that people take in those protests can be good or bad. And
Yeah,
I think that
I agree
one
with
is a good.
Gerard's point, but Sam, I think you're onto something. I wonder if those types of things are happening at these protests. Like, are they looking at Jewish people or pro-Israel people and calling them murderers and genocidal maniacs and
Yeah, they are. In
rapists
some
and all other
cases,
kinds of stuff? I
Yes.
mean,
in some
that-
cases they are.
Sometimes.
right? I mean, that
I don't know if
type of
everyone
stuff
is,
is
but
happening.
it's happening.
Yeah, that's the difference, I think, or one of the glaring differences between civil rights protesting, right? That we historically, at least as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's some sort of protest out there. I mean, there were certainly violent protests, but that was separate from the protests that MLK was involved in. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, Chris, any you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I'd like to add that it does matter, well, I think for a lot of folks, where they fall on things matters how much they agree with the protest itself, kind of what Chuck was talking about earlier. But how you have to be careful because, like, let's talk about the sitting protests of the civil rights movement, right? They were nonviolent, and a lot of people look back on those and they're supportive of them, even though that was disruptive to businesses, and the police could come in there and they could get all. As soon as the police, at the end of the day, have to enforce, they're supposed to enforce their job to remove people who aren't supposed to be in those places, right? And at that point, it's easy for things to escalate up as they resist, they say no and don't want to be arrested or something like that. It can easily the way that police have their leeway to escalate things up in this country, it can easily turn violent just like that, right? And there will be, and that's just the normal course of business of how things are done. I think that when you're sympathetic to the cause, a lot of times you allow more things to go and be okay with that protest. But when you're not as sympathetic to it, then you're a lot more judgmental of the people who are doing the protesting and how they go about it. Like I was saying earlier, the people, it's often groups that don't have the power that are trying to get attention of the people that do have the power to make something happen. And if you are one of the people that do have the power, if you're one of the people they're trying to influence, you're kind of in a more privileged position in that standpoint because you get to pick and choose who you want to listen to or not. I was like, I don't want to listen to your cause just because you don't support it right. It should be something completely, regardless of how well they do their protest or not. There is an issue that's supposed to be behind it, and is some truth or merits or lack thereof, regardless of how well they do their protest, right? But a lot of times, that privileged position that a lot of people take is like, hey, if you don't do it in the right way, without crossing the lines that I dictate or whatever, or annoy me the wrong way, then I won't listen to it, and I'll just make sure that I become your enemy and stay that way. And then you'll have to keep on yelling louder or whatever. And we just keep these protests going on indefinitely over time or whatever. And so some of that stuff tends to work. So when it comes to the civil rights movement, I'll go back to that for a second. There were black people who were being lynched and killed and stuff like that too. So you could say that, hey, this stuff is life or death too. And so you could start justifying that I can protest as far as violence in order to protect lives, so to speak, or whatever. So there's a lot of ways you can always escalate things up to a higher level if you want to. And if you're sympathetic to those people, then there are going to be people that are going to support you doing it that way. Just like with abortion and clinics and stuff, like there are people that bomb abortion clinics and all that stuff because they look at abortion as killing a life. And so at some point they say, I justify myself going all out and attacking doctors and all this other stuff just because they feel like, it's a life for life, I'm protecting life thing. And so when it comes to Israel and Palestine, if you're supportive of Palestine, if that's where you've decided to put your hat at, and you feel like you know, obviously Israel has a lot of power. They've been helped out by the United States and investors and whatever and so on and so forth. And you want to try to find some way to cut off that lifeblood somehow and make some difference to make that happen. That's why you have the protests happen here. You couldn't really, there's no real reason to have a protest if you were pro-Israel here in the United States of America to try to make something happen differently. Because I mean, if you're I don't think, well, first of all, it's not us. We're not really the one that's propping up Hamas or anything like that, right? You know, so it's not like protesting here is going to make us stop doing that or whatever. It's just a different dynamic whatsoever. But at the end of the day, they feel like there are Palestinian lives on the line, and so therefore it is like, oh my gosh, I want to save somebody's life. I want to feel heroic, and so I can justify myself going to higher extremes, to very extreme levels in order to help save somebody's lives. It's basically the
On the-
same blueprint and framework of thinking all across the board, basically. And it's just whether or not you allow yourself to justify going to those links in order to do it. Martin Luther King was wise enough to be able to see that that's not going to be, at the end of the day, it's not going to be help your cause. It's not going to be constructive. It's not going to make the people that you want to influence, change their mind or soften their hearts in any old way. So at the end of the day, it's really a hard issue you have to attack at the end of the day. Now, I know directly they're saying that they want to influence bank accounts and stuff like that. And I think that to a certain degree, a lot of folks really don't. I would agree that a lot of folks really don't know how those investments and all that stuff work. But people just want to feel like they have power. People want to feel like they have some influence. They're truly concerned about what's going on over there, but they don't know how to be effective where they're at. I think that if they were in the middle of that region and if they had a weapon next to them, maybe half of those people probably would pick it up and just start fighting or something like that. But they're way over here and they're not as motivated to go way over there. And so this is the best thing that, they can put that energy to, and they're willing to go to some pretty high extreme levels in order to get whatever they feel like they want to have done.
All right, so two things I'm getting out of what you're saying. The first thing is, whatever their techniques are and whether you agree with them or not, they have some sort of message here, right? And we need to listen to, at least listen to what they're saying, take it seriously a little bit. And the other thing that you're saying, which I'm not sure if I agree with, but it was actually a question I was going to ask, is you really do feel like many of the motivation of many of them is really genuine, and that they really care about the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people, and they see it as a great injustice. Was I accurate?
Yeah, I do think that most of them really do identify with that side and care about that issue. I don't think that it's fake necessarily. I mean, people may disagree and feel like, maybe they're misguided or whatever, but whether they're misguided or not, I think that that's really where their interests are.
I'm not sure how much of this is they really care and how much of it is political. And there's Charlotte, the Charlottesville, and you got a whole bunch of far right, white guys marching out saying the Jews will not replace us. The left was like, oh my God, this is horrible. And now they're chanting for genocide of the Jews. The same people who, if they were protesting, during the Charlottesville time, it would have been for the Jews.
Well,
just because the other side.
Yeah. Their argument is that that's not what they're saying, right?
Well,
or they're claiming ignorance when they say from the river to the sea or the Intifada stuff. That they're just saying it's a form of.
And I can understand that too. I mean, if you start some protests and they're chanting this little chant, and then someone says, "You do realize this is what this chant means?" And you go, "Oh, holy." I didn't know it meant. No, I was just here because I think Palestine needs a state. I didn't know. I didn't know I was protesting for the obliteration of Israel. That would be horrible.
They keep chanting
and
it.
then they keep chanting it. They keep chanting it.
Do you think that in these protests that there is an element on some level of anti-Semitism based on the things you've seen? That's to Chris.
Oh, didn't know that was me. Is there element? I'll be honest. I haven't really watched those protests very
Okay.
closely. I've just been looking at the headlines, so I can't really speak as strongly about what really motivates them or not. I'm sure there's maybe some degree of it. I'm sure it's in there, but exactly how much I really can't say.
Okay, so let's say 10% of the protests, or even 7%, were anti-Semitic, right? Spread out throughout the universities, right? If I'm a person and I know that there's other people in the protests that are screaming, I want 1,000 10-7s. I've seen Palestinian protests waving Nazi flags. I mean, really bad stuff. So if I'm a person who has a genuine interest in humanitarian stuff, right? And I see that sort of stuff, open anti-Semitism, open calls for genocide to wipe out the entire Israeli state, I'm going to stop protesting with those people. I know that. If I was in a protest for whatever reason and Nazis joined up, this is the same thing for Charlottesville. And I used to say it all the time to people on the right. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care if it's a small minority of people on 1-6 or Charlottesville or whatever the protest is.
I mean, you can say
protesting
that
with
now as an adult.
What's
You
that?
can say that now as an adult, but you're not like a 19, 20,
Well, that's a good
21-year-old that is like around all of their classmates and all of their friends, and in some cases, even their professors. You know what I'm saying? Like, shame on those professors, honestly. But I mean, anyway, my point being is that you can say this now, but I mean, we've all been 19, 20, 21, and I wouldn't
that's
walk
fair.
away from something.
I think that's a good position. I think if you were an adult, you have more of a responsibility to do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So,
One thing I'd say is
so I think that's fair.
like let's take the Tea Party rallies for example, and they have people that might show up with some Nazi flags or some stuff like that'd be in there, and the left wing media will talk about it's like, see, I told you there's just a bunch of racists that are over there doing it. And meanwhile, people that are mostly on the right would because they mostly sympathize with a lot of the stuff that those rallies were talking about, they pretty much just blew off those minority and said, hey, those are just bad apples, and we're just going to focus on those are the distractions. And that's why I go back to saying that it's really more based upon how much you empathize or sympathize with the either side on how you look at that, those detractors, so to speak. Because a lot of folks on the right were easily willing to just blow off those, the Nazi flag people and say, I think they're just ignore those. They're trying to mess up the purity of the movement.
But the other
on
part
Tea
of it
Party
you
party.
can't deny is it doesn't bother them as much.
What doesn't bother them as much?
If there's a Nazi and I'm marching with a group of Nazis, I'm out, dude. I'm fucking out.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
of
either
course,
you're
how
trying to
many
get out there
Nazis it matters, right? I mean, if everybody out there, you look every direction, it's just a sea of Nazi flags, right? That's one thing. But then if you see, like you said, if it's just like less than 10%, 5%, whatever that small portion is, if you see that one part, and where's that magic threshold
Right.
that says that I need to
Yeah.
turn away versus,
So
hey,
how's
let's shout
this?
this person down and
Yeah.
get them out of here or something.
Let's say that all of a sudden the protests become really public, right? And the media tends to focus on the really extreme parts of it.
Mhm.
If I'm a part of this protest, if I'm a leader of this protest, then I'm immediately not just saying we're not for anti-Semitism or we're not for racism. I'm saying the people who are in our protest need to get the fuck out. Like, that's my number one message. And the fact that you don't see that in the Charlottesville 1-6 protest, you don't see that. Like, we don't want you. It's not just we're not like that ourselves, but we don't want you in our movement at all. When you don't say that, that to me says, well, maybe you do want them, right?
I'd say that's the leadership of the protest has that responsibility to do those types of things, to kind of weed out those elements, to make it clear exactly what their message is and not. And if they don't, then they've obviously failed their own movement when they don't do those things, for sure.
But you don't
The
think
leader-
it's
the
fair
leader
to
of
blame
Columbia-
everybody. I get it. I
The
think
leader
that's-
at Columbia was calling for he said Zionists didn't deserve to live, so
he was expelled for what it's
yeah.
worth.
Yeah, but it's like, at what point when you it's one thing like you're saying, if there's like one thing there. I mean, in the convoy in Ottawa, I think there was like 6 to 10,000 protesters. There was a guy with a Nazi flag, one, and the prime minister, tried to paint the whole protest as a bunch of Nazis, and he got ridiculed for it because there was like one guy in the entire crowd with a Nazi flag, and everyone else is going, no, we're not Nazis. That's just one guy. But on the other hand, when your leader is calling out
Not
for the
just
murder of
leader,
scientists,
but the leader of the original protest, like
I
it
know.
started in Columbia.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
it wasn't. Yeah.
when your leader does that, okay, no, this isn't what I signed up for. Like Chris is saying, if there's just one guy over there, you can't control everybody. But like when it's the leader, you just go, no, okay, it's time to peace out of here because I don't need this on my resume.
I would say that the very genesis of these protests, whether or not the protesters realize it or not, is anti-Semitic. Now, I'm trying to get away from that phrase because I think it's becoming too ubiquitous. It's like, racist or white supremacists. We've just overused it to the point of almost obsolescence by now. But I mean, think about it. What you're saying by being willing to protest under these circumstances with the current facts as we know them is that Israel is supposed to not respond to 10/7 or stop responding. And when we know that Hamas very intentionally hides behind the civilian population, it's impossible to avoid civilian casualties. The people that are responsible for the civilian casualties is Hamas. It's the group that you are lending aid and succor to. The group whose charter says to eliminate Israel. This is not ambiguous. No, these are kids, and again, some of them I'm sure are swept up in the mania of it. All my buds are doing this. My psych prof is doing this, so I'm going to join them and be a cool kid or whatnot. I get that there's a certain element of that, but the absolute genesis of these protests is highly anti-Semitic. Now, every anti-Semite in the last 60 years has been able to say, no, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist. No, that's bullshit, because every Jew is in your crosshairs. When you are demanding, like they are on the campus of Cal Santa Cruz, that you decommission the Hillel Foundation, which is nothing more than a social organization for Jewish students that allows them to celebrate, to have a network on campus where they celebrate shared meals and things like that. When you want to eliminate that, you're not anti-Zionist, you're anti-Jewish. Get the fuck out of my face with that shit. The way they insult people's intelligence, as you can tell, kind of pisses me off too. I mean, these are just, quasi-Marxists. I don't think we should be giving them a degree of gravitas that they don't deserve. They're just the latest, like somebody else said earlier, these are the same fuckers who were, doing the BLM protest, Occupy protest a decade ago. They're no great thinkers. They are just, contemporary Marxist and are doing Marxist things. I don't hold any, but again, as a free speech guy, let them talk, as long as you do it legally. That's all I ask.
I think to kind of bring it back to the protest, the point about the leadership is a really good one. I think if you believe in something enough to protest with 10,000 other people, no matter what, there's going to be a few real shitheads there, real unsavory people who believe in things that you don't. And I don't know where the line is, but there is a certain line where you'll walk away, but there's also a certain line where you'll stay. But I think in this specific case of these protests at colleges, you have people who are leading them who are not leading them in the sense of, I don't think a morally correct grounds. I do think it is, they've brought people in kind of I hate to say it's all anti-Semitic, but I think the people who are leading it do lean that way. And there's a lot of people following it who are following those people. But then I look at something like the BLM protests where there was looting, there was buildings getting burned, but the leaders of BLM were loudly saying, don't do that. We don't support the people who are doing that. Now, just like always, left and right wing media focuses on the bad things that are happening instead of what's being said. But I think that puts, for example, those two protests on different moral grounds. The leadership.
Do any of you guys think that Israel is committing genocide? Just wondering.
No.
Are you on the genocide train? What about apartheid?
No. Well, I mean,
Probably.
there-
I haven't been, I don't like to speak on something really like with Israel. I haven't been there, so I don't know. There's a lot of mixed voices coming out of Israel on that subject, like the Ethiopian Jews that were brought to Israel. Some of them do not have some good stories. Does that mean I think Israel as a state should just dismantle itself and not exist? No. But yeah, no, I don't think it's, I just like most, like the United States, has everybody that's come here had like a great experience, or like, you know, is everybody that lives here enjoying it? You know, it's, yeah.
exactly. There's racism in the U.S., but the U.S. is hardly an apartheid state. You know,
What do you
there's
mean? When
there's
you
two.
talk about apartheid in this context, what do you mean? When you ask if Israel is an apartheid state?
So I mean that the Palestine, well, I guess there's two different ways you can think about it. So
That's
you can
why I
think about
asked.
it, yeah, you can think about it about the relative to the Arabs living within Israel, right, whether or not they're not given equal rights, or you can think about it in terms of how Israel treats Palestinians, right? So I guess. So I wouldn't say, so I think that if you included the Palestinians in it, it would be kind of a weird argument though, because Palestine and Israel are different territories. They're different regions.
Ruled by different governments, so
They're ruled by different governments.
yeah. There's
And
I think there's
Palestinians, the only argument you could make for it though, if you're a Palestinian, right, is that Israel has a disproportional amount of power over your well-being, right? They control food, they control security things, right? They have a much more powerful military. So you could, on some level, although I disagree with it, make an argument for apartheid. Then there's the I think more common argument is that the Arabs within Israel are a part of an apartheid regime because they're simply not given the same level of rights. But I don't think, based on what I know, that
that's
it
true.
reaches that level, right?
I'm pretty sure that I think there's like a couple million Arabs in Arab Israelis, and I believe they have equal rights with, and there's prejudice and racism that exists in the country, like
They don't
everywhere.
have equal rights with everything.
Well,
So
pretty much. I mean, they're the one of the judges who voted against Netanyahu was an Arab Israeli. You know,
So
there's the members of governments. I mean, I think they have, the citizens have, I mean, I don't think there's two different citizenship rights. Now, it's the same as the States or any other country. The rights, you know,
Jews have more rights in Palestine. I mean, in Israel, with specific things. I can't remember. You might have to Google them, but they do. They have the ability to do things that other ethnic groups or religious groups, I guess, couldn't do. I can't remember specifically what it is, but it is true.
I'd have to check that out.
Yeah. So that would be the apartheid, Gerard.
If it's truly the case that there's anything significantly different of rights, then you may be able to argue. You may be able to argue that then.
Yeah, I think we lost Chuck.
Chuck said he had to go.
Oh, we did?
Yep.
All right. So we can wrap this up. I'm sure everybody really.
Oh, well, there one other point. I was thinking I don't know how much these protests are being infiltrated too. You have lots of people in masks. I was just reading in the paper. We're having these protests up in Canada as well. McGill and University of Toronto are having these protests. One of the professors from U of T kind of snuck into one of the encampments and was talking to people about things. And he's going, "A bunch of these people aren't students."
Yeah.
because anyone can, it's a public space. So I don't know how much of just the local
Well,
Palestinian community that's coming in to protest that aren't even students that are representative of the universities.
Yeah, there are internal protests and there's external protests too. They did a breakdown of them, like a lot of the people who were arrested, and there was like an 20% were outside agitators, 80% or something.
Okay.
So that is true. So we're gonna wrap up. Anybody else have anything to say on protests? Just one more question, because I'm kind of interested, and I've asked this at the end of our other podcast. And I think I've asked most of you, obviously not Sam, but at this point in the election season, do you guys still think, because I think almost all of you thought, at least at one time, that Biden was going to win. Do you still think he's going to win?
No.
Neither do I. Chris, you were a big proponent for Biden, man.
No, I didn't say that. I wouldn't say I was a big proponent, but I still say that, the jury's out. It's going to be a close race, right? We're only talking about a few states, maybe a few 100,000 votes or whatever. It's going to be close. But I think that he's starting to get more and more better at, once Trump's race kind of wrapped up. So he is polling a little bit better. But it's really not based upon nationwide closes, because he needs really a bigger gap than what he in order to even really have a good chance of winning the way that the electoral college works out.
I mean,
so
yeah,
but yeah, polls. We're a long ways out. Anything can happen. I think what I see Biden doing is he's doing the right things in that he's reaching out to Americans as a whole. Trump is calling Democrats Gestapo, and how well did that work for Hillary in the basket full of deplorables?
Well, Trump's always done that, and it's always worked for him. In his
Trump had a bigger open basket before. He was accepting Nazis into the camp just because he wanted the extra votes, and you had to actually get him to say, oh no, white supremacism is wrong. But on the third or fourth time when you ask him to say that, he goes, oh, white supremacy is wrong. It's like he already goes, okay, he's just saying that because he has to. But yeah. He's always said but he's getting worse. He's attacking his own party, right? He's
always done that. He's always been unhinged. He's always attacked.
He's always been out, but people. I know.
He came out and he destroyed a bunch of journalists on Fox News' entire career. Look at whatever that lady was, right? I mean, he went on stage with 15 other Republican nominees in 2015 and completely annihilated them by taking totally different positions on primary issues and just acting like a complete total lunatic.
At some point, I think people will get sick of it. People like unifying messages.
Well,
and we'll see.
What?
So
the polling right now.
Oh, yeah, but it depends who's actually shows up, right?
It's always based on turnout at the end of the day.
If you get lots of turnout, it's a completely different game. And I think U.S. elections are like razor thin at the best of times.
I don't think this one's going to be razor thin. I think Trump's going to fucking kill it. And the reason I know.
Oh, well, here.
Well, listen, hear me out.
Oh, go ahead.
Guys.
Here. Go ahead.
In terms of polling, right? And I know everybody's skeptical because we're way out. I think that's all nonsense, but whatever. The polling in 2016, when it came to Hillary Clinton, she was ahead in every single swing state, just about. Maybe there was some variation in swing states. I mean, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, and Georgia, Arizona. And So was Biden. And in some instances, commanding leads. And Trump is winning every single one now. Now, there's an argument that they've sort of recalibrated how they do polling now, maybe. But when a Republican has that sort of lead consistently for a really long time and it doesn't seem to be breaking, that's a pretty good indication that he has a pretty, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. I'm concerned,
Yeah.
but it's May. If a whole bunch of people on the left are so pro-Palestine that they think I'm just not going to vote, Trump will win
Yeah, and they are.
because they don't vote. If they're stupid enough to believe that Trump is going to be better for Palestine than Biden, then Trump will win. It depends if they can actually get people out to vote, because there's a bunch of Republicans who just are not pro-Trump anymore. They've had enough of his crap, and they'll either not vote for Trump, they'll vote Republican down the ticket and not vote for Trump, and a bunch of them will vote for Biden. I think it matters if you can actually get the Democrats to actually get off their jaded asses, and Biden's not an exciting guy. I mean, he's not a. I mean, it's going to be a vote against Trump, not a vote for Biden. Even though, the economy's doing good, a lot of things are doing great. He's an old guy, and they've seemed to sell the idea that he's an old guy, even with Trump falling asleep in court,
Yeah. Honestly,
I have
Biden's
concerns.
not sexy.
No,
Biden's not very
Well-
sexy. At the end of the day, Trump, he's always going to be more sexier than Biden. Not saying that I'm attracted to him or anything, but just
And-
that, he's more of an entertainer. He's the type of person that people more likely to fall in love with, as opposed to Biden being somebody that you can just tolerate and put up with because he's not Trump. That's the best that Biden can be at this particular point. And I think some of the biggest factors that are going to play a difference is, well, one, there's the third party candidate potential spoiler, RFK Jr., that can play a role in, changing up how this outcome is, that I think could be a bigger factor than most people are thinking about. Depends on who he ends up stealing votes from, so to speak, because I don't think he's going to be able to win, of course. But then there's also, how many of these states actually get like referendums, on their ballot for, such things like abortion and stuff like that or whatever. Because if you getting rid of marijuana or legalizing marijuana, different things like that, right? Because when you start putting stuff like that and start getting certain things on the ballot or not on the ballot, that all of a sudden changes how the turnout flows. And next thing you know, Biden might have a better chance than you do, or maybe have a worse chance or whatever. I think a lot of those things are going to have a bigger chance, influence on turnout than just some of the back and forth. Because I think something we were talking about earlier, before the podcast went live, in regards to how media is not covering that much of what Trump says, and he's sounding like a crazier, grumpier old guy that lost his mind these days. But nobody's really covering it that much, and I think they're kind of overcorrecting from 2016, where they just covered him too much, just because of his entertainment value, and it made money for the media in terms of ratings. So they realized, like, well, maybe we helped them get to the presidency and win this thing, and so now we're gonna downplay him and try not to worry too much about him. But now, because you don't worry too much about him, I don't think people see him that much as a threat. He's just, we're just gonna go back to maybe some better economy in our mind, so to speak, and maybe that might be better. I think absence always makes the heart grow fonder, like I've always said. So Trump does have that advantage. He's been going for a while, and people kind of forget how crazy it was having him in the media cycle every day over nonsense. But so I think it's very easy and possible for Trump to win this thing again, but I still think there's a lot of variables that are out. And I mean, Biden does have money advantage, but I think these days money is having less and less influence with the internet. So we'll just have to see as things start coming around to July, and we start getting the what are those, the conventions and stuff and all that stuff, and see where things start laying out, maybe early September. By that time, you'll probably start getting a better idea of who's probably going to win this thing and bag it up.
Rob?
I'm not if you said $1 million, who do you think is going to win? I would say Biden. Not nearly as confident now as I was in 2020, though. But like Daryl said, there's a lot of time between now and the actual election. In 2016, yeah, Hillary Clinton was leading the polls. She was leading the polls up until, I think, what was it, 6 days before, when Robert Mueller released that whole
Not Mueller, Comey.
Comey, that's right, Jim Comey. Yeah, released all that shit, and that ended up being the difference in the election. I think things happening, Israel Palestine getting wrapped up before the election helps Biden. I think right now Biden has a lot less baggage than Hillary did, and all things being equal, I think the things that could possibly come out are more likely to be in Biden's favor. I think it's more likely to be evidence that gets released from the trials that Trump is eventually going to have to face in some of these cases. They're not going away. As much as he's trying to delay him and make him go away, Supreme Court's delaying things, more evidence is going to be coming out. The Trump voters that are going to vote Trump, or we're going to vote for him before, are going to vote for him after. It's really those swing voters. And in a lot of ways, it's not even so much, are these swing voters going to vote for Biden? It's, are they going to reach a point where they say, I just can't vote for Trump? I expect the Biden campaign to start really focusing more on things like Trump's civil trial where he was found to have sexually assaulted a woman. I expect the evidence that's already come out on the paying off of Stormy Daniels trial going on right now, that there's really strong evidence that he was cheating on his wife with a couple different women. I think those things start getting pushed more and more. Trump voters are still going to vote for Trump. Anti-Trump voters are still going to vote against Trump. But those swing voters, I think it's more likely that things are going to happen that are going to push them away from voting for Trump than away from voting for Biden.
Okay. Sam, last word?
I would vote for dark Biden over regular Biden.
What is dark Biden? What is dark Biden?
Oh, you haven't seen like the meme or like the whole movement of dark Biden? It's when Biden is given like a bump of cocaine before he goes out and does a speech, and he's like super savage.
Dark
and
Brandon.
Dark
Brandon.
Oh, Dark Brandon. Okay, yes. Okay, Dark Brandon. I think he's who needs to be more in the forefront to get the youth, because from what I hear from even like just a lot of the younger people I'm in Florida. I don't think I brought that up originally, but there's a lot of Trumpers down here. Even when I was in Chicago not long ago, I ran into just a ton of pro-Trump people. I don't know. I don't know if people are just casually pro-Trump in real life, but then vote Democrat in private. I don't know. But anyway, I don't think the protests look good for him. It just further can allow Trump to drive home the country's out of control type of argument. So I don't think it looks good for him. I don't think that he has a lot going for him for re-election. Democrats historically have been kind of like flaky at the polls. So we will just have to wait and see.
All right. Well, with that, Biden's also he presents really old. I don't think we said that. I just want to throw that out there. He looks like an elderly person up there struggling to get himself to function sometimes. I mean, that's how he presents.
It's not the State of the Union, though. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the guy that was on the State of the Union was great.
He did much better there. I have to admit that, and I admitted it at the time, and I think it helped him.
I think that's because we had a low bar for him, because we called him old and senile and all this other stuff. So he really didn't have that high of a bar to jump over in order to impress people for the State of the Union. But he came out of there just smoking away because he was able to stay up the whole speech and go on the attack and stuff. So, I think to a certain extent that kind of helps him if they give that impression that he's old and senile and stuff, because it gives him opportunities to prove it wrong if he shows up the way he did that night.
Probably also don't want him too high in the polls come election day, because if he's leading by too much, people will, I don't need to vote. You want some fear into people to show up, even if it's just because of abortion and other things. I better show up because You know, because
No,
these other issues. Whereas, well, yeah, I'm late at work today. I don't have time to stand in line. But oh shit, I better get my ass down to the polls. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you all for coming by. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good to meet a few new faces.
Yeah.
Yep. Same.
And
Nice to meet
until next
everybody.
time, I'll see you guys.
Take
All right.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.